The patrol ship drifted through the darkness of the Orion spine, like a metal insect crawling across black glass. Inside, a crew of 12 Kolvari soldiers sat at their stations, bored and tired. They had been watching this stretch of space for 6 standard months. Nothing ever happened here. Nothing ever changed. The 3 great empires had divided the galaxy between them a long time ago, and the borders were quiet. Lieutenant Tyrek sat at the signals console, his scaled fingers tapping against the armrest. He was young for a Kolvari officer, barely 40 cycles old, and he had joined the Hegemony's navy because he wanted to see the galaxy. Instead, he had seen the same patch of empty space for half a year. He was thinking about requesting a transfer when every alarm on his console screamed at once. He nearly fell out of his chair. The sound was deafening, a high, sharp wail that meant something massive had just entered sensor range. The readings made no sense. The spatial distortion was enormous, bigger than anything he had ever seen in training simulations. And the energy signature did not match any known form of faster-than-light travel. It was not hyperspace. It was not fold transit. It was not warp compression. It was something else entirely. "What is that?" the ship's captain demanded, rushing to the command platform. Tyrek's claws shook as he worked the controls. "I do not know, sir. It does not match anything in our database. The distortion is still growing." Then it stopped. The distortion collapsed, and something appeared in the space ahead of them. It was a ship. Tyrek stared at his screen for a long time. Then he looked up through the observation window, and his blood went cold. The thing was enormous. It stretched across the void like a sleeping beast, dark and scarred and impossibly large. The patrol ship was a speck of dust next to it. The vessel was at least 12 kilometers long, its hull matte black and covered in deep gouges and burn marks, as if it had traveled through a war that never ended. There were no smooth lines, no elegant curves like the Celestine ships, no hive-like symmetry of the Vithari. This ship looked like it had been built by something angry, something that did not care about beauty, something that only cared about surviving. It sat there in silence. No transponder signal, no identification code, nothing. Within minutes, the news spread like fire. Sensor arrays across 3 empires detected the arrival at the same moment. The Kolvari hegemony scrambled its nearest war fleet. The Vethari Dominion sent a swarm of scout drones. The Celestine Communion, the oldest civilization in the galaxy, reached out with their strange energy-based senses and tried to understand what they were feeling. They did not like what they found. The diplomatic channels between the 3 empires exploded with accusations. The Kolvari accused the Vethari of building a secret weapon. The Vethari accused the Celestine of hiding ancient technology. The Celestine accused everyone of stupidity and demanded silence so they could think. None of them wanted to admit the truth, that none of them had any idea what this ship was or where it had come from. Back on the patrol ship, Tyrek worked frantically. He ran the ship's silhouette through every known database. No match. He analyzed the hull composition. Unknown alloys. He scanned for life signs. The ship was blocking his sensors completely. In desperation, he ran a deep archive search. A slow, ancient program that compared new data against records going back thousands of years, including intercepted signals from primitive civilizations. When the result appeared on his screen, Tyrek read it 3 times. Then, he read it again. His mouth went dry. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his skull. "Sir," he said quietly, "I have a partial match." "Well, what empire built it?" "No empire, sir." Tyrek turned to face his captain. "The hull markings are in a language called English. It is from the Saul system." The captain blinked. "Saul? The primitive system? The ones under the observation accord?" "Yes, sir." "That is impossible. Those creatures do not have faster-than-light travel. They do not even have a proper space fleet. They are nothing." Tyrek said nothing. He simply pointed at the screen, where the deep archive program had translated the markings on the ship's hull. The letters were massive, burned into the dark metal in a script that was crude and bold and utterly alien to galactic standards. UN Arabus, United Earth Navy. The captain's face changed. It went from confusion to disbelief to something that looked very much like fear. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out in command centers and government halls. The Vithari Hive Queens clicked their mandibles in agitation. The Kolvari War Council roared and slammed their fists on ancient stone tables. The Celestine Elder Speakers floated in their chambers of light and said nothing for a very long time. Humanity was supposed to be contained. Humanity was supposed to be small, divided, and harmless. The Observation Accord had been in place for centuries. It was designed to keep the humans exactly where they were, stuck on their little blue planet, fighting among themselves, never looking up long enough to become a threat. And now a ship the size of a city sat at the crossroads of three empires, and it had come from that little blue planet. For 3 hours, nothing happened. The Arabus simply floated in the void. Fleets gathered at a safe distance. Thousands of weapons locked onto the dark hull. Diplomats argued, generals shouted, analysts ran calculations and came up with numbers that made them feel sick. Then the Arabus powered up. Every sensor within 50 light-years screamed. The energy readings were beyond anything the galaxy had ever recorded from a single vessel. The output was not just high, it was impossible. It exceeded the combined power of the entire Kolvari Third Armada. 800 warships, and this one battered, scarred vessel made them look like toys. A transmission burst out on all frequencies. It was broadcast in every known galactic language, all 47 of them, simultaneously. The voice was calm. It was steady. It belonged to a human woman, and it carried the weight of something old and patient and very, very dangerous. This is Captain Ilara Voss of the United Earth Navy vessel Arabus. We have traveled a very long road to get here. We know what you have done. We are not here to ask for permission. The transmission ended. Silence fell across the galaxy. And for the first time in 10,000 years, every empire in the known universe felt the same thing at the same moment. Fear. 300 years before the Arabus appeared at the Orion Spine, a Vithari scout ship crashed on the far side of Earth's moon. It was a small vessel, barely the size of a school bus, and its pilot had been dead for weeks before impact. A malfunction in its navigation system had sent it tumbling off course, deep into a region of space the Vithari considered worthless. The ship buried itself in the gray dust of a crater that had no name, and it sat there in silence, waiting. Humans found it in 2089. A mining survey team, drilling for helium-3 in the lunar soil, hit something that was not rock. Within hours, a team of scientists arrived. Within days, the governments of Earth knew. Within weeks, the greatest secret in human history was born. The ship was broken, but it was full of wonders. Its power core still hummed with energy that human physics could not explain. Its data storage held fragments of star maps showing a galaxy that was vast and crowded and ruled by powers so far beyond humanity that the gap seemed impossible to cross. The scientists studied every piece of it. They learned slowly, painfully, making mistakes that cost lives and years. But they learned. The humans were not quiet enough. The Vithari noticed the missing scout. The Celestine Communion detected unusual energy patterns coming from Saul. The Kolvari hegemony intercepted strange new signals from the third planet of that boring little yellow star. The three empires met in secret, and they made a decision that would shape the next 3 centuries. They called it the Observation Accord. The name sounded gentle, almost scientific, as if they were simply watching an interesting animal in its natural habitat. But the accord was not gentle. The three empires agreed that humanity was a potential threat, not because humans were strong, but because they were unpredictable. They learned too fast. They adapted too quickly. They looked at broken alien technology, and instead of worshipping it or fearing it, they took it apart and tried to build something better. That kind of species was dangerous, so the empires acted. Vethari agents sabotaged early human deep space probes, making them fail in ways that looked like engineering errors. Kolvari intelligence operatives fed false data to human astronomers, making the galaxy seem emptier and more hostile than it really was. The Celestine Communion, the most ancient and powerful of the three, used their influence over electromagnetic fields to subtly disrupt human communications, stoking division, feeding paranoia, keeping the nations of Earth at each other's throats so they would never unite long enough to look up at the stars. For decades, it worked. Then, in 2031, a group of humans built a colony ship in secret. It was called the Dawn of Centauri, and it carried 40,000 people, families, scientists, engineers, dreamers, on a one-way journey to Alpha Centauri. They had used what they learned from the crashed Vethari ship to build a crude but functional engine that could push them to a fraction of light speed. It would take generations to arrive. They did not care. They were going anyway. The Celestine Communion destroyed them. A single Celestine energy pulse, fired from a vessel hiding in the outer reaches of the Sol system, struck the Dawn of Centauri 6 months into its voyage. The ship broke apart in an instant. 40,000 human beings, men, women, children, the bravest and brightest of their species, died in the cold silence of space. The Communion made it look like an engine failure. The official galactic record noted it as another example of a primitive species destroying itself through ambition beyond its ability. Earth mourned. The world's governments pointed fingers at each other. The dream of the stars seemed dead. But not everyone believed the lie. A small group of people, military officers, scientists, intelligence operatives, looked at the data from the Dawn of Centauri's last transmission and saw things that did not add up. The energy pattern that destroyed the ship did not match any human weapon. The failure was too complete, too precise, too clean. These people found each other in secret, shared what they knew, and came to a terrible conclusion. They were not alone in the universe, and whatever was out there had just murdered 40,000 of their people. They called themselves the Prometheus Directive, and they made a vow. They would never forget. They would never forgive, and they would never ever be caught unprepared again. For 300 years, the Prometheus Directive worked in the shadows. They built hidden laboratories deep underground, in the ocean floors, inside hollowed-out asteroids. They took the alien technology from the Vethari crash and did not just copy it. They broke it down to its most basic principles and rebuilt it from nothing, combining it with human science, human creativity, and human rage. The galactic empires used hyperspace drives that bent space along predictable paths. Humanity built the Rift Drive, which tore through the walls between dimensions. It was violent and rough, and nothing like the elegant systems the aliens used. But it was faster, much faster. The empires used plasma weapons and antimatter torpedoes that had not changed in design for thousands of years. Humanity built singularity lances, weapons that created tiny controlled black holes and hurled them at targets. They built cascade warheads that could shatter the molecular bonds of any known material. They built the Aegis Mantle, a defensive system that bent space-time itself around a ship, making it nearly untouchable. And they built the Arabus. 12 kilometers of dark metal and fury. A ship that was also a city, carrying 200,000 human souls who had dedicated their lives to one purpose: to step out of the cage and make the galaxy answer for what it had done. The Arabus was not just a warship. It was a promise written in steel and fire. Now, 3 centuries later, that promise floated at the intersection of 3 empires, and the galaxy was beginning to understand what it was looking at. In the war chambers of the Kolvari hegemony, the generals mobilized every ship they could reach. They were a warrior species. They had conquered dozens of worlds. They did not fear one ship, no matter how large. In the hive towers of the Vethari Dominion, the hive queens studied the Arabus's hull composition and felt their antennae tremble. They recognized their own technology in the ship's design, but twisted, evolved, pushed far beyond anything the Vethari had ever achieved. The humans had not just stolen their fire, they had turned it into something the Vethari could not understand. And in the crystal chambers of the Celestine Communion, the elder speakers reached out with their ancient senses toward the Arabus, and felt something that shook them to their core. Deep inside the ship, at its very heart, there was an energy signature that the Communion had believed was theirs alone. The resonance, the fundamental force that had given birth to their species 200,000 years ago. The humans had found it. They had made it part of their ship. The eldest of the elder speakers, a being called Valith, who had lived for 40,000 years, stared into the void toward that distant, dark ship, and whispered words that no Celestine had spoken in millennia. They did not just learn our fire, they built a better sun. The Kolvari Third Armada, 800 warships, the pride of the hegemony, surrounded the Arabus and opened a channel, demanding immediate and unconditional surrender. Captain Ilara Voss sat in her command chair aboard the Arabus. She was a small woman with gray hair and steady hands, and eyes that had seen things no human should have to see. She looked at the 800 warships on her screen, and she did not blink. "You have 15 seconds to withdraw," she said calmly. "This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy." The Kolvari did not withdraw. Voss closed the channel and turned to her weapons officer. "Light them up." The Kolvari Third Armada opened fire at the exact moment the 15 seconds ended. 800 warships unleashed everything they had at once. Plasma volleys screamed across the void in rivers of blue and white. Antimatter torpedoes launched in waves of hundreds, each one carrying enough destructive force to level a city. Kinetic kill vehicles, dense rods of tungsten accelerated to a fraction of light speed, streaked toward the Arabus like metal rain. The combined firepower of the Third Armada was enough to crack a small moon. The Kolvari had calculated this. They were warriors. They understood destruction the way other species understood art or music. Every shot hit exactly where it was supposed to. And nothing happened. The Aegis mantle activated around the Arabus, like a ripple spreading across still water. Space itself bent. The plasma volleys curved away from the hull, as if pushed by an invisible hand. The antimatter torpedoes reached the edge of the distortion field and simply stopped existing, their matter and antimatter components annihilating prematurely, releasing flashes of light that looked like dying fireflies. The kinetic rounds slowed, twisted, and fell into spiraling orbits around the ship, before drifting away harmlessly into the dark. The Arabus took 0 damage. Its hull did not even shake. On the bridge of the Kolvari flagship, Supreme Commander Rethka watched his tactical display with wide, unblinking eyes. He was a veteran of 30 campaigns. He had personally overseen the bombardment of 2 rebel worlds. He had never seen anything survive a full volley from the Third Armada. He had never even imagined it. "All ships, fire again," he ordered. "Concentrate on a single point. Overload their shields." They fired again. 3 volleys, 4, 5. Every weapon in the fleet poured fire into one spot on the Arabus's hull. The energy readings climbed to levels that made the sensor officers look away from their screens in pain. The Aegis mantle held. It did not flicker. It did not strain. It simply existed, bending the laws of physics around the ship like a stone in a river, letting everything flow around it. Silence fell across the Kolvari bridge. Rethka stood very still. His claws gripped the command railing so hard that the metal groaned. Then the Arabus fired. It was a single shot. One weapon. A singularity lance. The Arabus's hull opened along a seam that ran nearly a kilometer down its spine, and something that looked like a needle of pure darkness streaked out into the void. It moved faster than anything the Kolvari sensors could track. The next moment, it was in the center of the fleet formation, and the universe folded around it. A micro-black hole, controlled, directed, and impossibly stable, bloomed in the space between the warships. It lasted for exactly 1.7 seconds. In that time, it pulled 47 Kolvari warships into itself. The ships did not explode. They did not break apart. They compressed. Metal, fuel, weapons, atmosphere, and crew, all of it crushed into a point so small that it ceased to have meaning. 47 ships and over 60,000 Kolvari soldiers simply stopped existing in less than 2 seconds. Then the black hole collapsed, and the space where those ships had been was empty. The singularity lance had been aimed at the gaps between the ships. It had been aimed to miss. Captain Voss opened a channel. Her voice was the same as before. Calm, steady, almost gentle. That was aimed to miss. The next one will not be. Leave. On the flagship, Rethka looked at the hole in his formation. 47 ships gone. Not damaged, not disabled, gone. Erased from the universe as if they had never existed. And the human woman was telling him that she had been trying not to hit them. His second-in-command, a scarred old soldier named Krath, stepped close and spoke quietly. "Sir, we cannot win this fight." "We are the third Armon," Rethka whispered. "We do not retreat. If we stay, there will be no third armada." Rethka stood in silence for 10 seconds. It was the longest 10 seconds of his life. Then he gave the order that no Kolvari commander had given in 10,000 years of military history. "All ships, full withdrawal, now." The third armada broke formation and ran. 800 warships, minus 47, turned and fled into hyperspace, scattering in every direction like startled animals. The greatest fighting force the Kolvari hegemony had ever built ran from a single ship. Independent traders and journalists who had been watching from the edges of the system recorded everything. Within hours, the footage spread across the galaxy. Every species on every world saw the same thing. The mighty Kolvari, the warriors who had crushed rebellions and conquered star systems, running in terror from one dark, battered vessel. The effect was like an earthquake. In the halls of the Galactic Senate, a fancy building on a neutral world where the three empires pretended to govern together, delegates from minor species stood up and demanded to speak. They had been quiet for centuries, kept silent by fear and power and the unspoken threat of what the big empires would do if the small ones made too much noise. Now they were shouting. The Drexi, a small and gentle species that the Vithari had forced into labor for generations, sent a message to their overseers for the first time in their history. It was one word: no. The Own Collective, a silicon-based species that the Kolvari had been slowly mining for their rare biological minerals, sealed their borders and armed their defense platforms. They had always been told resistance was pointless. Now they had seen proof that it was not. A dozen other species, small, forgotten, dismissed, looked at the footage of the Third Armada fleeing and felt something they had not felt in a very long time: hope. And aboard the Arabus, Captain Voss did not celebrate. She did not smile. She sat in her chair and watched the retreating fleet on her screens, and then she turned to her communications officer. "Begin the broadcast," she said. The Arabus transmitted a data package on every open frequency in the galaxy. It was massive. Hundreds of terabytes of information, carefully organized and translated into every known language. It contained records, communications, orders, and evidence that the Prometheus Directive had spent 3 centuries collecting. The truth about the observation accord, the real reason humanity had been caged, the sabotage of human space programs, the manipulation of human politics, the lies fed to human scientists, and at the center of it all, the one truth the empires had tried hardest to bury, the destruction of the dawn of Centauri, and the murder of 40,000 innocent humans by the Celestine Communion. The data was undeniable. It included intercepted Celestine communications, energy signature analysis that matched Communion weapons, and even internal Vethari memos discussing the operation in cold, clinical terms. And the galaxy shook. While governments raged, and populations protested, and old alliances crumbled, the Celestine Communion made a quiet, desperate decision. They sent one of their elder speakers, Valeth, the oldest living being in the galaxy, to the Arabus under a flag of diplomacy. Valeth told the other empires that they would negotiate with the humans and bring this crisis to an end. That was a lie. Valeth's real mission was to reach the heart of the Arabus and use the resonance, the ancient energy that the Communion had wielded since their birth as a species, to shut the ship down from within. The Communion believed the resonance was theirs by right. Whatever the humans had done to copy it, it was still, at its core, a Celestine force. Valeth would simply turn it off, and the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known would become a dead, drifting tomb. Captain Voss allowed Valeth aboard. She even provided an escort. The elder speaker glided through the ship's corridors, past humans who watched with hard, knowing eyes, deeper and deeper into the Arabus, until Valeth reached the core chamber. And there, Valeth stopped. The resonance was there. Valeth could feel it, the same ancient singing energy that had birthed the Communion in the heart of a dying star 200,000 years ago. But it was different. The humans had not copied it. They had not stolen it. They had taken it apart, understood it at a level the Communion never had, and rebuilt it into something new. It was cleaner, stronger, more controlled. The Communion's resonance was a wildfire. This was a fusion reactor. Valeth reached out to touch it, to command it, to shut it down. The resonance did not respond. It did not recognize Valeth as its master. The humans had freed it from the Communion's ancient, clumsy grip and made it something better. Valeth floated in that chamber for a long time, feeling very old and very small. Then the elder speaker turned and looked at the human engineer standing quietly by the door, a young woman with grease on her hands and fire in her eyes. "What have you done?" Valeth whispered. The engineer shrugged. "We fixed it." Valeth closed their ancient glowing eyes and understood, for the first time in 40,000 years, what it felt like to be afraid. The truth burned through the galaxy like acid through paper. Every species with a communications array received the Arabus's broadcast, and the ones who had lived under the boot of the 3 empires read it with shaking hands and pounding hearts. The observation accord, the sabotage, the murder of 40,000 human colonists, the cold, calculated decision to cage an entire species because it learned too fast and dreamed too big. And if the empires had done this to humanity, what had they done to everyone else? The Drexy were the first to move. They were a small species, short, soft-skinned, with large dark eyes that made other races think they were helpless. The Vethari had thought so too, which is why they had used the Drexy as forced labor in their hive factories for 400 years. The Drexy had always been too afraid to resist. They had no weapons, no warships, no army. But they had seen the footage of the Third Armada running, and something inside them cracked open. On 17 Vethari colony worlds, Drexy workers stopped working. They put down their tools, stepped away from the machines, and refused to move. The Vethari overseers screamed at them, threatened them, struck them. The Drexy did not fight back. They simply sat down on the factory floors and said nothing. Millions of them, all at once. The Vethari production lines ground to a halt. They were a silicon-based species, and the Kolvari hegemony had been quietly mining own bodies for rare minerals for centuries, calling it a resource exchange program. The OWN sealed every border, activated ancient defense systems that the Kolvari did not even know existed, and broadcast a single message to the hegemony: come and take them yourself. The Peluri, the Nesh, the Iridani, species that most of the galaxy had forgotten even existed, all began to stir. Some rebelled openly. Others sent quiet messages to each other, building networks in the shadows, sharing resources and information. A fire was spreading, and the three empires could not stamp it out, because it was burning everywhere at once. In the halls of power, panic set in. The Kolvari War Council raged and argued and blamed each other for the humiliation at the Orion Spine. The Vethari Hive Queens sealed their chambers and held emergency councils that lasted for days. The Celestine Communion said nothing publicly, but behind their walls of light, the elder speakers were splitting apart. The younger speakers, beings who were merely a few thousand years old, looked at the evidence in the Arabus broadcast and felt something the communion had not felt in 200 millennia: shame. For the first time in recorded history, the three empires agreed on something. They formed the Trilateral Compact, a formal military alliance with one single goal: destroy the Arabus and everything it represented. They pulled warships from every corner of their territories. They emptied their reserves, recalled their patrols, and stripped their border defenses bare. When they were done, they had assembled the largest fleet the galaxy had ever seen: 15,000 warships. Enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. They sent this armada toward the Orion Spine, expecting to find the Arabus waiting for them. The Arabus was gone. Captain Voss had not waited for the hammer to fall. She had done what the empires never expected. She left. The Arabus activated its rift drive and tore a hole in the fabric of space, vanishing from all sensors in an instant. The Trilateral Compact fleet arrived at an empty stretch of void and found nothing but the fading echo of a drive signature they could not trace. The Arabus traveled for 3 days through the space between the galaxy's spiral arms, a vast, empty wasteland of dark matter and silence where no empire had ever thought to look. And there, hidden in the most desolate corner of the galaxy, Voss brought her ship home. Sanctuary. It was not one station or one base. It was a civilization. Hidden in the void for over 2 centuries, Sanctuary was everything the Prometheus Directive had built in secret. Orbital habitats spinning slowly in the dark, their lights glowing like scattered jewels. Shipyards larger than anything the empires had ever constructed. Farms and factories and schools and hospitals, all carved into the emptiness between the stars. And ships, not just the Arabus, but 11 more like it. 12 Arabus-class warships in total, each one 12 kilometers of black metal and terrible purpose. Alongside them floated hundreds of smaller vessels, cruisers, frigates, carriers, and support ships, forming a fleet that had been built over 3 centuries by human hands, human minds, and human anger. Over 2 million people lived in Sanctuary, men, women, and children who had been born in exile, raised on the story of what the galaxy had done to their people, and trained to be ready for the day when the cage finally broke open. That day had come. Voss stood in Sanctuary's central command chamber and looked at the faces around her. Fleet captains, colony leaders, engineers, soldiers, and scientists who had given their entire lives to this moment. She did not give a grand speech. She did not need to. They all knew why they were here. "We are not going to conquer anyone," she said. "We are going to free everyone." The message went out, not to the empires, but to the species the empires had crushed. The Drexi, the Own, the Peluri, the Nesh, the Iridani. Every small, forgotten, beaten-down species that had been told for centuries that they were nothing. The message was simple. You are not alone anymore. They called it the Free Compact. Not an empire, not a dominion. An alliance of equals, built on one principle. No species would ever be caged again. The response was overwhelming. Ships arrived at Sanctuary from across the galaxy. Old, patched-together vessels carrying diplomats and refugees and volunteers. The Drexi sent their best engineers, who turned out to be brilliant in ways the Vithari had never bothered to notice. The Own Collective sent crystals that could store and amplify energy in ways that made human scientists gasp. The Peluri, who had a gift for communication that no other species could match, became the Free Compact's voice, broadcasting the Alliance's existence to every corner of the galaxy. And then something happened that no one expected. A Celestine ship arrived at Sanctuary. Not a warship, a diplomatic vessel carrying a dozen younger elder speakers who had broken from the communion. At their head was Valeth, the ancient being who had boarded the Arabus and seen the truth of what humanity had built. Valeth had returned to the communion after leaving the Arabus and told the elder speakers what they had found. The response had been denial, then anger, then threats. The communion did not want to hear that a species of short-lived, fragile beings had taken their sacred resonance and improved it. Valeth had looked at the ancient, proud, blind stubbornness of their people and made a choice. They left. They took every Celestine who would listen and flew to Sanctuary. "I have lived for 40,000 years, Valeth told Captain Voss when they met again. "In all that time, I have never seen a species that burns as brightly as yours. It terrifies me, but I would rather stand with something that terrifies me than kneel to something that shames me." Voss accepted Valeth's hand and welcomed them into the Free Compact. The oldest being in the galaxy joined the youngest alliance, and the balance of power shifted. But the empires were not finished. The Kolvari hegemony, humiliated and desperate, made a decision that crossed every line the galaxy had ever drawn. Deep in their most secret military vaults, they activated a weapon that had been forbidden since the last Galactic War, 6,000 years ago. A stellar igniter, a device that could destabilize a star, causing it to expand and consume everything in its system. Their target was Saul, Earth, humanity's homeworld. The Kolvari did not tell the Vithari or the surviving Celestine leadership. This was not a military operation. It was revenge. If they could not destroy the Arabus fleet, they would destroy the thing the humans loved most. They would burn Earth and everything on it, and they would make humanity watch. A fast Kolvari strike fleet, 3,000 warships escorting the stellar igniter, launched in secret, racing toward the Saul system on a direct hyperspace route. They thought they were being clever. They thought they were being quiet. They were wrong. The Peluri, with their extraordinary ability to detect communications across vast distances, intercepted a fragment of the Kolvari battle plan and relayed it to Sanctuary in minutes. Captain Voss read the report. Her face did not change, but something in her eyes went very quiet and very dark, like the moment before a storm breaks. She stood and walked to the command platform and looked out at her fleet. 12 great warships and hundreds of smaller vessels, crewed by humans and Drexi and Own and Peluri and Celestine defectors, all of them watching her, waiting. "All ships," she said, "full burn. We are going home, and God help anyone in our way." The fleet moved. The rift drives tore open the void, and Sanctuary's lights shrank behind them as the free compact fleet surged toward Saul at speeds the galaxy had never seen. The race for Earth had begun. The Kolvari strike fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Saul system, and the sun greeted them like a golden eye opening in the dark. 3,000 warships spread out in a defensive formation around the stellar igniter, which sat at the center of the fleet like a diseased heart. The device was massive, a sphere of dark metal and pulsing energy conduits, bristling with antennae that reached out toward the sun like hungry fingers. It had been built 6,000 years ago during the last great galactic war, and it had never been used. The species that built it had been too afraid of what it would do. The Kolvari were not afraid. They were angry. Supreme Commander Rethka stood on the bridge of his new flagship and stared at the small blue planet orbiting the yellow star. Earth, the birthplace of the species that had humiliated his people, shattered his fleet, and broken the hegemony's reputation in a single afternoon. He felt nothing for the billions of lives on that world. They were insects. They were less than insects, and in a few hours their star would swell and swallow them, and the galaxy would learn what happened to species that challenged the Kolvari. "Begin the ignition sequence," he ordered. The stellar igniter hummed to life. Energy beams lanced out from its antennae toward the sun, burrowing deep into the star's core, destabilizing the fusion reactions that had burned steadily for 5 billion years. The process would take 6 hours. At the end of those 6 hours, the sun would expand into a red giant, and Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars would be consumed. There would be nothing left. Rethka watched the countdown timer and allowed himself a cold smile. 63 minutes into the ignition sequence, his sensor officer screamed. 12 spatial distortions, massive, violent, wrong, tore open the fabric of space behind the Kolvari fleet. The distortions were so powerful that nearby ships tumbled out of formation, their systems scrambling to compensate. Through those tears in reality came the free compact fleet. 12 Arabus-class warships emerged first, their dark hulls catching the sunlight as they spread into a battle line. Behind them came 300 smaller vessels, human cruisers, own crystal ships that glowed with strange internal light, Drexy support carriers, and Pelori communication frigates that immediately began jamming Kolvari frequencies. And at the center of the formation, leading the charge, was the original Arabus, its scarred hull unmistakable. Captain Voss sat in her command chair and looked at the tactical display. 3,000 Kolvari warships. The stellar igniter pointed at her sun. And behind it all, small and blue and heartbreakingly beautiful, was Earth. She had never seen it with her own eyes before. She had been born in Sanctuary, raised on stories and photographs, and the burning memory of a home she had never known. Now it was right there in front of her, and someone was trying to kill it. "All ships," she said, "weapons free." The Battle of Saul began. It was not like the skirmish at the Orion Spine. That had been a demonstration, a warning shot across the bow of a galaxy that needed to wake up. This was war, real war, the kind that tore holes in the fabric of space and left scars that would take centuries to heal. The 12 Arabus-class ships fired their Singularity lances in a coordinated barrage. 12 needles of compressed darkness streaked into the Kolvari formation, and 12 micro-black holes bloomed like flowers of annihilation. Ships vanished by the hundreds. The Kolvari fleet, dense and tightly packed around the igniter, suffered catastrophic losses in the first 30 seconds. But the Kolvari were warriors, and they did not break. Not this time. Rethka screamed orders, and his fleet reformed around the igniter, pouring fire at the attacking ships. The smaller free compact vessels took hits. A Drexy carrier broke apart. 2 human cruisers collided, trying to avoid a wall of plasma. An crystal ship shattered into 1,000,000 glowing fragments. The Kolvari could not hurt the Arabus-class ships. The Aegis mantles held firm, but the smaller vessels were vulnerable, and the Kolvari knew how to focus fire. The battle became a grinding, brutal thing, fought in the light of humanity's own star. And the igniter kept running. The countdown continued. The sun's energy output was climbing, its surface beginning to ripple and bulge in ways that had not happened in 5 billion years. Voss saw the numbers. The fleet was winning the battle, but they were losing the war. The Kolvari did not need to win the fight. They just needed to protect the igniter long enough for it to finish its work. At the current rate, the sun would pass the point of no return in less than 2 hours. She could not destroy the igniter from a distance. It was buried in the center of the Kolvari formation, shielded by hundreds of warships that were willing to die to protect it. Every singularity lance aimed at it was intercepted by ships throwing themselves into the path. There was only one option. Voss opened a channel to the entire fleet. All ships, clear a path to the igniter. The Arabus is going in. Her first officer, Commander David Chen, looked at her. He was a quiet man with steady hands and a mind like a clock, and he understood immediately what she was planning. Captain, if you overload the resonance core at that range, the energy discharge will be... I know what it will be. The ship might not survive. Earth will. Chen looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded and turned to his console. All stations, prepare for close assault. Resonance core to maximum charge. Helm, plot a direct course to the igniter. The Arabus surged forward. The other 11 Arabus-class ships and every remaining free compact vessel threw themselves at the Kolvari flanks, pulling their fire, drawing their attention, ripping open gaps in the formation. Ships died on both sides. The void between Earth and Mars became a graveyard of burning metal and frozen atmosphere. The Arabus plowed through the center of it all. Kolvari ships fired at it from every angle. The Aegis mantle bent and warped and held, but the strain was immense. Warning lights flashed across the bridge. Hull stress alarms screamed. The ship groaned like a living thing in pain. Voss did not slow down. Then, at the worst possible moment, the Vithari arrived. A massive fleet, 2,000 hive dreadnoughts, dropped out of hyperspace on the far side of the battle. For a terrible moment, every human heart in the free compact fleet stopped. But the Vithari did not fire. Hive Commander Sketh, the leader of the Vithari fleet, looked at the battle raging before them and made a cold, practical calculation. The Vithari had always been survivors. They read the currents of power better than anyone, and right now the current was flowing in one direction. The Kolvari were finished. The free compact was the future, and the Vithari intended to be on the winning side. Sketh opened a channel to Captain Voss. Human vessel, the Vithari Dominion withdraws from the trilateral compact. We will not interfere. Proceed. Then, from behind the Vithari fleet, came the Celestine dissidents, Valix faction, flying ships that glowed with ancient power. They did not hesitate. They did not negotiate. They flew straight into the Kolvari formation and began tearing it apart from the inside, their resonance abilities disrupting Kolvari systems and shredding their shields. The Kolvari formation broke. Rethka screamed for order, but his ships were being hit from 3 directions, and the Arabus was still coming, unstoppable as a force of nature. The Arabus reached the stellar igniter. Voss looked at the device through the observation window. It was close enough to touch, a sphere of dark metal, humming with stolen stellar energy, its antenna still reaching toward the sun like the arms of something greedy and cruel. Resonance core is at maximum charge, Chen reported. His voice was steady, but his hands were white on the console. She looked around the bridge, at her crew. Men and women who had been born in exile, who had never seen the sky of the world they were about to save. Discharge, she said. The Arabus's resonance core released everything it had. The energy poured out of the ship like a river breaking through a dam, a wave of force so pure and powerful that it made the Celestine resonance look like a candle next to a bonfire. It slammed into the stellar igniter and tore it apart from the inside out. The device shattered. Its energy conduits exploded. The beams reaching toward the sun flickered and died. The backlash hit the Arabus a heartbeat later. The ship bucked like a wounded animal. Bulkheads cracked. Systems failed. Lights went dark. The Aegis mantle collapsed, and for the first time, the Arabus was naked and vulnerable in the void. But the sun steadied. Its surface calmed. The readings dropped back toward normal, slowly, like a fever breaking. Earth was saved. The remaining Kolvari fleet, leaderless and shattered, surrendered. Rethka's flagship drifted dead in space, its systems burned out by the energy wave. The Supreme Commander was found alive in his command chair, staring at nothing, his mouth moving without sound. The Arabus limped into Earth orbit on emergency power. Half its systems were dead. Its hull was cracked in 100 places. Captain Voss had been thrown from her chair during the discharge and had broken her leg and 3 ribs. She refused to leave the bridge until she could see Earth through the observation window. When she saw it, blue and green and wrapped in white clouds, spinning slowly in the light of the star she had just saved, she did not speak for a long time. She just looked at it, and tears ran down her face, and she did not wipe them away. Below, on Earth, 8 billion humans looked up at the sky. They had received the broadcast. They knew everything. The observation accord, the massacre, sanctuary, the Prometheus directive, and the battle that had just been fought in their name. They stood in their streets and fields and cities, and they looked up at the stars, and they understood that everything had changed. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy rebuilt itself. The Kolvari hegemony collapsed completely. Its vassal species broke free, its military was dismantled, and its leaders were brought before a new galactic tribunal to answer for the attempted destruction of Earth and its sun. The Vithari Dominion negotiated a difficult peace, agreeing to free every enslaved species and open its borders to oversight. Hive Commander Sketh, ever the pragmatist, became the Dominion's first ambassador to the Free Compact. The Celestine Communion split in two. The Old Guard retreated to their ancient worlds and refused to speak to anyone. The younger faction, led by Valeth, joined the Free Compact and began sharing knowledge that had been hoarded for 200,000 years. When asked why, Valeth said simply, "We kept our light hidden for too long. It is time to share it." The Free Compact became the new center of galactic governance, not an empire, but an alliance of equals. Humans, Drexy, Own, Peluri, Celestine, and dozens of other species sat together and built something that had never existed before. A galaxy where no one was caged. The Arabus was repaired. It took months, and when it was done, it was moved into a permanent orbit around Earth as a monument, a reminder of what humanity had endured and what it had built. Captain Alara Voss recovered from her injuries, though she walked with a cane for the rest of her life. She refused every political office offered to her. She said she was a soldier, not a politician, and that the Free Compact did not need heroes, it needed good people. On the day the Free Compact was formally established, Voss stood on the observation deck of the Arabus and watched Earth turning below. A young Drexy ambassador named Luma approached her. Luma was barely 2 feet tall, with large dark eyes and a voice like a quiet bell. "Captain Voss," Luma said, "may I ask you something?" "Of course." How did your people endure it? 300 years of hiding, of being caged, of knowing what was done to you. How did you not give up? Voss looked at the small alien, and then back at Earth. She was quiet for a long time. Because giving up was never one of the options, she said. Every generation passed the torch to the next. Every mother told her children the truth. Every engineer and soldier and scientist woke up every morning knowing that one day we would open the cage door, not because we were stronger than anyone else, but because we are very, very stubborn. Luma stared up at her. The galaxy is afraid of your people, Captain. Voss shook her head slowly. They should not be afraid of us. They should be glad we chose to be kind, because we had every reason not to be. We had every reason to burn it all down and start over. We chose to build something better instead. She looked out at the stars. Thousands of them, millions of them, each one circled by worlds full of beings who were, for the first time in galactic history, truly free. That is what makes us human, she said quietly. Not the ships, not the weapons, not the resonance or the rift drive or any of it. It is the choice. We will always choose to build. Luma nodded slowly, their dark eyes reflecting the light of 1 billion stars. Below them Earth turned on, blue and green and stubborn and alive, orbiting a sun that still burned because one battered ship and one tired captain had refused to let it die. The galaxy had spent 10,000 years building cages. Humanity had spent 300 years building keys, and now every door was open.